Welcome back to the deep dive. Today, we are standing at the edge of what I think is one of the most uh, profound mysteries in all of human biology.
It really is.
I want you to just pause for a second and picture this. You have a thought, just a fleeting, intangible thought. Maybe you're stressed about a deadline, or maybe you wake up and, see sunlight hitting the window.
Right, and that's an electrical event, a spark in the brain. It's fast, it's fleeting, and it's gone in milliseconds.
Exactly. But then, and this is the magic part, that electrical spark somehow translates into something physical, something, heavy and tangible.
Mm-hmm.
It turns into bone growth in a child. It turns into ovulation. It turns into the production of milk. It turns into a surge of cortisol that changes how your liver processes sugar. How does a thought become a chemical? How does the brain actually talk to the body?
It is the ultimate interface problem. I mean, you have two completely different languages. You've got the nervous system, which is fast, it's electrical, and it's basically digital on or off.
A 1 or a 0.
Exactly. And it's trying to communicate with the endocrine system, which is slow, chemical, and totally analog. It's all about concentrations and sustained flows over time.
It's like a fiber optic cable trying to talk to a smoke signal.
That's a great analogy, a really great analogy. And the translator, the device that converts that flicker of light into a puff of smoke, is a very small, very complex piece of architecture called the hypothalamic pituitary axis.
The HPA.
The HPA. This is the command center, if you want to use a corporate metaphor, and I know how much you love those.
I do. It helps anchor the abstraction. It gives you something to hold on to.
Well, think of the hypothalamus as the CEO. It sits in the executive suite, the diencephalon in the brain. It has access to all the high-level data, external stress, light cycles from the eyes, emotion from the amygdala, autonomic signals from the brainstem. It knows everything that is happening outside and inside the company.
But the CEO doesn't go down to the factory floor to weld the widgets.
Right. The CEOs are way too busy for that. And frankly, the CEO's skills are strategic, not mechanical. So the CEO sends a memo to the middle manager.
Oh.
And that middle manager is the pituitary gland. And the pituitary gland is the one that actually picks up the phone and screams at the factory managers, the thyroid, the adrenals, the gonads, to get to work.
And today we are dissecting that entire chain of command. We are doing a deep dive into Pharma 42, the hypothalamic pituitary axis. And for our source material today, we are synthesizing two absolute giants of the field. We have the Clinical Bible, Katzung's Basic and Clinical Pharmacology, Chapter 37.
That's going to be our practical guide, our what to do.
And we have the mechanistic heavyweight, Goodman and Gilman, Chapter 42.
And that is a really important distinction for you to keep in mind as we go through this. We are bringing these two together for a specific reason. Katzung is going to give us the what. What drug do I give? What is the dose? What is the clinical protocol? It provides the scaffolding for treatment.
And Goodman and Gilman.
Goodman and Gilman gives us the why, the molecular physics. Why does the receptor twist that way? What is happening inside the cell when that hormone lands? It gives us the systems level insight. So consider this deep dive your conceptual map. It's not a replacement for reading the chapters. You absolutely still have to do the reading.
Of course.
But this is going to help you understand the territory before you start walking.
I love that. So before we get into the weeds, and we are going to get into some serious molecular weeds today, let's plant some signposts. What are the big themes the listener needs to look out for?
Okay, I'd say there are 5 key takeaways we need to nail down right at the top. First is hierarchy with humility.
Hierarchy with humility. I like that.
The brain leads, yes.
Yeah.
It gives the orders. But it is constantly, obsessively listening to feedback from the body. If the body says we have enough, the brain shuts up.
It's a good manager. It listens to its employees.
It has to, or we die. It's as simple as that. Second is the concept that pulsatility is language. This is fascinating. In pharmacology, we usually think dose matters. More drug equals more effect.
Right, the dose-response curve.
Here, the rhythm matters, the timing. If you give a drug in a pulse, it might turn the system on. If you give the exact same drug as a continuous stream, it might shut the system off completely.
That is wild. The rhythm changes the meaning of the message. It's like the difference between a knock on the door and someone just leaning on the doorbell.
Precisely. One gets your attention, the other makes you disconnect the bell. Third is tropic logic. We need to distinguish between a signal hormone, which just tells a gland to work, and an effector hormone, which actually does the work in the body's tissues.
Okay. Signal versus effector. And fourth,
feedback failures. When we talk about disease in this system, it's usually because a feedback loop is broken. We'll talk about primary failure, where the organ itself is broken, secondary failure, where the pituitary is broken, or tertiary failure, where the hypothalamus is broken. You have to know where the break in the chain is to fix it.
And finally, the fifth one.
Pharmacological strategy. Everything we do with drugs in this system is about hacking these loops. We treat disease by mimicking the signal, blocking the signal, or overwhelming the signal to essentially deafen the receptor.
Mimic, block, or overwhelm. I like that. Okay, let's start at the very beginning. Section 1, the architecture of control. We use this word hormone all the time, but what does it actually mean? Where does it come from?
It comes from the Greek. It literally means to set in motion.
That's very action-oriented. It's a verb, not a noun.
It is. And classically, we define hormones as chemicals made by ductless glands, like the thyroid or pituitary, that travel through the blood to distant targets. But as Goodman and Gilman points out, that definition has really had to evolve.
It's too narrow now.
It's way too narrow. We now know the heart secretes hormones that regulate blood pressure. The kidneys make erythropoietin. Fat cells adipocytes are actually a huge endocrine organ, regulating appetite and metabolism, even the brain itself.
So the definition has broadened. But conceptually, Goodman and Gilman splits them into two chemical classes that really matter for how they work. And this is a fundamental split.
Right. This is the first big fork in the road. You have to understand this, to understand the timing of these drugs. The first class is the nuclear receptor actors.
Okay, what's in that group?
These are your steroids, like cortisol and estrogen, thyroid hormones, vitamin D.
And what's their defining characteristic? What makes them a family?
They are lipophilic, fat-loving. Think about a cell membrane. It's a lipid bilayer. It's fat. These hormones are like ghosts. They don't need a door. They just float right through the cell wall like it isn't even there.
Straight through the membrane.
Straight through. They go right into the cytoplasm, find a receptor, and then the whole complex marches into the nucleus, finds the DNA, and changes gene transcription.
They rewrite the software. They change the code the cell is running.
Yes. But think about the timescale of that. If you are rewriting software, compiling code, and then manufacturing new proteins from that new code, that takes time.
Hours. Days even.
Exactly. That's why if you give someone steroid for inflammation or thyroid hormone for energy, it doesn't work in seconds. It takes a while to see the full effect. This is the ghost mechanism. Slow but profound and long-lasting.
Okay, so ghosts are slow but powerful. What's the second class?
The second class are the membrane receptor actors. These are your peptides, amino acids, proteins. Think growth hormone, LH, FSH, insulin. They are hydrophilic, water-loving, not fat-loving. So get to the cell membrane, they bounce right off. They cannot get in.
They're stuck outside. The door is locked.
Exactly. So they have to ring the doorbell. They bind to a receptor on the surface of the cell. This receptor is transmembrane, goes all the way through the wall. When the hormone hits the outside, the receptor changes shape on the inside.
And that shape change is the signal.
That's the signal. It triggers a cascade of signals inside the cell's signal transduction. We call it the doorbell mechanism.
And that's fast.
Super fast, seconds to minutes. Because this relies on activating proteins that are already sitting there, just waiting for the alarm to go off. So the HPA-axis hormones we are discussing today, they are mostly doorbell ringers. They're the rapid response teams.
Okay, that is a fantastic distinction. Keep that in mind, everyone. Ghosts rewrite the code slowly. Doorbells trigger the alarm quickly. Now, let's look at the physical connection. I want to visualize this. We have the hypothalamus up in the brain, and hanging off it, like a cherry on a stem, is the pituitary.
It's tiny. I mean, it weighs about 0.6 grams. That's less than a paperclip. And it sits in this little bony pocket in the skull called the sella turcica.
Which means the Turkish saddle.
Exactly. Which sounds cozy, but it also means there's no room for expansion. If it swells, if it gets a tumor, it's got nowhere to go.
And that has some pretty scary clinical consequences.
Oh, absolutely. The optic chiasm, which is where the optic nerves from your two eyes cross over, sits right on top of that saddle.
So if the pituitary grows a tumor,
it pushes up. It physically compresses those nerves.
Yeah.
And because of the way the fibers cross, patients often lose their peripheral vision first. It's called bitemporal hemianopsia. They basically get tunnel vision because the pituitary is literally crushing the wires coming from their eyes.
That is a terrifying image, but a crucial diagnostic clue for a clinician. But the most critical anatomical detail you have to understand is that the pituitary isn't just one thing. It's two different organs that are kind of glued together.
The anterior lobe and the posterior lobe.
And they are connected to the brain in totally different ways. This isn't just trivia, it changes everything about how we treat them.
It really does. Let's walk through the posterior pituitary first.
Okay.
The posterior pituitary, or the neural hypophysis, is actually just an extension of the brain itself. It's made of neural tissue.
Mm.
The neurons, the cell bodies, they live up in the hypothalamus, in the supraoptic and paraventricular nuclei,
Right.
and they send their long axons, their wires, straight down the pituitary stalk, and they end in the posterior pituitary. It's a direct hardline connection.
So it's just a storage unit for the brain.
Precisely. The neurons make the hormone upstairs in the hypothalamus, they ship it down the wire, and they store it in little vesicles in the posterior lobe until it's needed. When the signal comes, they release it directly into the general circulation. It's fast, direct, neural control.
But the anterior pituitary, the adenohypophysis, is different?
Completely different. It is glandular tissue. If you put it under a microscope, it looks like the thyroid or the pancreas. It's made of flesh, not nerve.
Mm-hmm.
And critically, there is no direct wire connecting it to the brain.
So if there's no wire, how does the CEO send the memo? The brain can't just shout at it.
This is one of the most elegant and, honestly, beautiful systems in anatomy. It's called the portal system. This is the blood bridge.
A blood bridge.
The hypothalamus releases its releasing hormones into a tiny, private network of veins, the hypothalamic adenohypophyseal portal veins. These veins travel just a short distance down the stalk to the anterior pituitary. It's a dedicated high-speed delivery service.
That's fascinating. It's like a diplomatic pouch. It doesn't go through the general mail. It goes direct point to point.
And that matters because of dilution. Imagine if the brain released a hormone into the main jugular vein. It would go to the heart, get mixed with 5 liters of blood, and be diluted to almost nothing by the time it got back around to the pituitary.
The brain would have to scream to be heard. It would have to produce massive amounts of hormone.
Exactly. But with the portal system, the brain can release tiny, tiny amounts, picograms, nanograms, whispers, really. And because those whispers travel down this private road, they arrive at the pituitary in extremely high concentration. The whisper becomes a shout.
I love that image. It's all about efficiency. So let's trace the logic of this axis. It's a 3-step dance.
Right. Step 1. The hypothalamus releases a releasing hormone. Let's use the adrenal axis as an example this time. It releases CRH, corticotropin-releasing hormone.
Yeah, CRH, step 2.
The anterior pituitary receives that CRH via the portal system. It binds it to membrane receptors on its cells, and in response, it releases a tropic hormone or a signal hormone. In this case, that's ACTH, adrenocorticotropic hormone.
And step 3.
The target gland, the adrenal cortex, receives the ACTH from the general circulation and finally releases the actual target hormone, which is cortisol. And cortisol is what goes out to the body to manage stress, blood sugar, inflammation, and so on.
Okay, so we have releasing lyontropic my own target, CRH, ACTH, lowers cortisol. But the system can't just run forever. It has to have an off switch.
That's the thermostat. That's the negative feedback loop. When cortisol levels in the blood get high enough, they circulate back to the pituitary and they say, hey, we've got enough. Stop releasing ACTH.
And it goes higher than that, right?
It goes all the way back to the top. It goes to the hypothalamus and says, stop releasing CRH. It shuts down the entire chain of command from the top down.
This sounds simple, but I want to talk about how this helps us diagnose patients. Let's play doctor for a second. If I have a patient with low energy, weight gain, and I suspect thyroid issues, I measure their hormones.
Right.
If I see that their thyroxine, T4, the final product, is low, but their TSH, the signal from the pituitary, is sky high, what does that tell me?
Okay, think about the logic of the thermostat. The brain is screaming, work, work. That's the high TSH. The manager is yelling at the top of their lungs. But the factory, the thyroid, isn't producing.
So the breakdown is in the factory itself.
Exactly. The thyroid gland is broken. It's not listening. We call that primary failure. The problem is at the primary organ.
Okay. But what if the thyroxine is low and the TSH is also low, or inappropriately normal, which is just as bad?
That changes everything. Now, the factory is silent, but the manager isn't yelling. That means the manager is asleep at the wheel. The problem is in the pituitary, or maybe even higher, in the hypothalamus. We call that secondary or tertiary failure.
And that distinction is crucial because the treatment might be the same. You give the patient thyroid hormone, but the cause is totally different. One might be an autoimmune disease attacking the thyroid, like Hashimoto's. The other could be a brain tumor pressing on the pituitary.
Exactly. You cannot diagnose these patients just by looking at the target hormone.
Mm-hmm.
You have to look at the relationship between the signal and the product. You have to check the integrity of the feedback loop.
That makes perfect sense. So high signal, low product means the breakdown is in the factory. Low signal, low product means the breakdown is in the management.
You've got it. That is the fundamental diagnostic logic of all of endocrinology. If you understand feedback, you understand the disease.
So we've established that the system relies on this delicate feedback. But let's look at what happens when we apply that logic to something visible, something dramatic. Let's talk about the axis that literally shapes us from childhood, the machinery of size. Let's move to section 2, the somatotropic axis.
Growth hormone. This is where we really start to see the complexity of the regulation, because it's not just one on switch and one off switch.
Who are the players here? Let's meet the cast.
It's a constant tug of war. The hypothalamus has a gas pedal and a brake. The gas pedal is GHRH, growth hormone releasing hormone. It tells the pituitary to synthesize and release GH.
And the brake?
The brake is somatostatin. It's a powerful inhibitor. It tells the pituitary to stop. And these two are pulsing all day long, creating the rhythm of GH release.
And there's a third player, right? A wild card from the gut.
Right, ghrelin. This hormone comes from the stomach. It's best known as the I'm hungry hormone. It spikes before meals. But it also binds to receptors on the pituitary and powerfully stimulates GH release.
Why would hunger make you release growth hormone? That seems counterintuitive. If I'm starving, shouldn't my body stop trying to grow?
You'd think so. But remember what growth hormone actually does metabolically. Yes, long term it makes kids taller. But in the short term, its primary job is to liberate energy. It breaks down fat lipolysis, and it raises blood sugar. It's an anti-insulin hormone.
Ah, okay.
So if you are starving, if you're fasting, ghrelin spikes GH to mobilize your fat stores for energy so you don't die of hypoglycemia.
So it's a survival mechanism first and a growth mechanism second.
In an evolutionary sense, absolutely. Now, once GH is released into the blood, it goes to the liver. And this is a key distinction from Goodman and Gilman. GH is the manager. It goes to the liver and tells it to hire a contractor.
And that contractor is?
IGF-1, insulin-like growth factor 1.
So IGF-1 does the actual building, the dirty work.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah.
IGF-1 is what mediates the chronic long-term effects. It's what makes the chondrocytes in the long bones of children divide and grow. It's what builds muscle mass. It's what increases bone density.
I want to pause on the mechanism here. We talked about doorbells earlier. How exactly does growth hormone ring the doorbell? Goodman and Gilman is very specific about the JAK-STAT pathway. And I feel like a lot of people just memorize that acronym without really knowing what it means.
You're right, and it's a beautiful piece of molecular machinery. It's worth understanding. Let's zoom in. Picture the cell membrane of a liver cell. Floating in that membrane are growth hormone receptors.
Yeah.
But here's the catch. They are monomers. They are single, lonely pillars just floating around.
And are they active when they are alone?
No. They are completely inert, useless. But when a molecule of growth hormone arrives, it acts like a bridge, or maybe like a set of handcuffs. It has two binding sites. It grabs one receptor pillar with its left hand and another receptor pillar with its right hand.
And it pulls them together. It forces them into a pair.
It physically drags them together. We call this dimerization. Now, attached to the bottom of these pillars on the inside of the cell are enzymes called JAK2, Janus kinase 2. When the pillars are apart, the JAKs are too far away to talk to each other. But when GH pulls the pillars together, the JAKs smash into each other.
And they activate each other.
They get excited by the proximity. They phosphorylate each other, meaning they stick a high-energy phosphate group onto their partner. This flash of phosphorylation creates a kind of magnetic high-energy landing pad on the receptor complex.
A landing pad for what? What's coming next?
For the STAT proteins, STAT stands for signal transducer and activator of transcription. They're just floating by in the cytoplasm. They see this phosphate signal, and they dock onto the receptor.
Like a ship docking at a port.
A perfect analogy. Once they dock, the JAKs then phosphorylate the STATs. The STATs then pair up, detach from the receptor, and march straight into the nucleus to bind to the DNA.
So the sequence is GH pulls the pillars together, JAKs smash and spark, STAT dock, and get charged. STATs go to the nucleus. Growth genes turn on, like the gene for IGF-1.
That is the JAK-STAT pathway. And the reason you need to know that level of detail is because, as we'll see in a minute, one of our best drugs works by sabotaging that specific handshake.
Before we get to the drugs, let's talk about the patient. What happens when this elegant system goes wrong?
Well, if you have a deficiency in a child, it's tragic but clinically straightforward.
Yeah.
You get short stature, they fall off the growth chart, their growth velocity is low. We treat that by giving them recombinant growth hormone, a drug called somatropin.
And in adults, what does GH deficiency look like in an adult?
It's more subtle. Low muscle mass, low bone density, increased visceral fat, and actually an increased risk of cardiovascular mortality. It's not just a growth hormone, it's a metabolic health hormone.
But the excess.
Yeah.
Excess is where the pathology gets really dramatic.
The giants. If you have a tumor, usually a pituitary adenoma, secreting GH before your bone growth plates close in childhood, you get gigantism. You just keep growing taller and taller. You can be 8 feet tall.
But if it happens in an adult, after the bones are fused and can't get any longer?
You can't get taller, so you get wider. You get acromegaly.
And that name tells you what happens. Acro means extremities. Megaly means enlargement.
Right. And this is an insidious disease. It comes on so slowly that patients and their families often don't notice it for years. They might notice their shoe size has gone up or their wedding ring doesn't fit anymore. They think they're just getting older.
Because the fingers and toes are getting thicker.
Yes. The jaw grows, causing an underbite, a prognathism. The teeth separate. They get these big gaps between them because the jawbone is expanding, but the teeth aren't. The tongue grows, macroglossia, which leads to terrible obstructive sleep apnea because the tongue blocks the airway at night.
And what's happening internally?
Visceromegaly. The heart enlarges, the liver enlarges. The enlarged heart leads to cardiomyopathy and heart failure, which is a major cause of death. And because GH fights insulin, these patients almost all get diabetes. It is a systemic, life-shortening catastrophe if you don't treat it.
So how do we diagnose it? Do we just measure GH in the blood?
No. And this is a classic board exam trap. GH is pulsatile. It shoots up and down all day long. If you catch a patient during a trough, they look totally normal. If you catch a healthy person after a workout or when they're asleep, their GH might look high. A random GH level is basically useless.
So what do we do instead?
First, you check IGF-1. Remember, that's the contractor. Its levels are much more steady throughout the day, so it's a great screening test. But the confirmatory test is the oral glucose suppression test.
How does that work?
Remember the feedback loop. In a normal person, sugar should turn off GH to signal of energy abundance. So you give the patient a sugary drink, essentially a super soda. In a normal person, GH levels should be suppressed down to almost zero.
But in a patient with acromegaly,
the tumor doesn't care about the sugar. The tumor is autonomous. It ignores the feedback, the GH stays high. That's your diagnosis.
okay, we've diagnosed the giant. Now we have to treat them. We need to shut the system down.
We have 3 main strategies, and they align perfectly with that mimic, block, overwhelm theme we started with.
Okay, strategy 1.
Strategy 1, fix the brake. We mimic the natural stop signal. We give somatostatin analogs like octreotide or lanreotide.
Why not just give natural somatostatin?
Because of its half-life. Natural somatostatin lasts about 3 minutes in the blood. It's degraded instantly by enzymes. It's completely useless as a medicine.
So octreotide is just a tougher version.
Exactly. It's chemically modified to resist degradation. It lasts for hours, or in the long-acting depot formulations, for a whole month. It binds to the somatostatin receptors on the pituitary tumor and tells it to stop producing GH.
Okay, that makes sense. What's strategy 2?
Strategy 2 is to block the receptor. This is the drug pegvisomant. And this is where that molecular mechanism we just talked about becomes so clinically crucial.
So how does it work?
Pegvisomant is a genetically engineered mutant growth hormone. It's designed to bind to the receptor with one hand, but, and this is the genius part, it has a mutation at the second binding site. It refuses to grab the other receptor with its other hand.
It blocks the handshake. It prevents the dimerization.
It occupies one half of the dock, but prevents the second ship from ever arriving. No dimerization means no Jake collision. No J collision means no stand charging. The system is dead in the water.
That is incredibly clever. It gums up the lock. But Ketsung notes a really weird side effect, or rather a lab finding here.
Yes. This is so important. Remember, the drug is blocking the action of GH, not the secretion of GH. So the body perceives a lack of effect. The feedback loop is broken. The liver isn't making IGF-1, so the brain screams, we need more GH.
And the pituitary tumor, which is already overactive, just pumps out even more.
Right. So if you measure blood GH levels in a patient on pegvisomant, they will be sky high, stratospheric. But it doesn't matter because the receptors are all blocked. The GH can't do anything.
So clinically, this means you can never use GH levels to monitor the drug.
Never. You have to monitor IGF-1. You watch the contractor, not the manager. If IGF-1 levels are coming down, your drug is working, regardless of how high the GH is.
That is such a critical clinical pearl. Okay, that makes sense. Let's move to section 3, the prolactin exception. We call this the break-first system.
Yes. Every other anterior pituitary hormone we've talked about, TSH, ACTH, GH, the gonadotropins, is waiting for a go signal from the hypothalamus.
They're quiescent until told otherwise.
Exactly. Prolactin is the rebel. It is under chronic tonic inhibition. It is waiting for a stop signal to be lifted.
It wants to go.
It is raring to go.
Yeah.
The lactotrope cells in the pituitary are constantly ready to synthesize and release prolactin. The only thing stopping them is that the hypothalamus is constantly bringing dopamine onto the pituitary via that portal system. Dopamine is the brake. Prolactin inhibitory factor is dopamine.
So let's play out this stock section thought experiment. If a patient suffers a severe head trauma, like in a car accident, that severs the pituitary stalk.
All the releasing hormones from the hypothalamus can no longer reach the anterior pituitary. So TSH crashes, ACTH crashes, GH crashes. The patient develops panhypopituitarism.
But prolactin?
Prolactin skyrockets. You've cut the brake line, and the car just rolls down the hill.
Now, prolactin does what you expect. It stimulates the mammary glands to produce milk, lactation. But it also does something else really important. It shuts down the reproductive system.
Right. High prolactin levels powerfully suppress GnRH release from the hypothalamus. This causes amenorrhea, a loss of periods, and infertility in women.
And evolutionarily, this makes perfect sense.
It's a natural child spacing mechanism. If a woman is nursing an infant, high prolactin prevents her from getting pregnant again immediately, which protects the resources for the current baby.
But today, in clinical practice, we see high prolactin hyperprolactinemia caused by other things. Tumors, sure. Prolactinomas are the most common pituitary tumor, but also medications.
This is a huge cross-discipline point that everyone needs to know. Antipsychotic medications, particularly the first-generation ones like haloperidol, but also some second-generation ones like risperidone.
How do they relate? What's the connection?
Think about the mechanism of schizophrenia. The psychosis is thought to involve too much dopamine activity in certain pathways in the brain. So we treat it with dopamine antagonist drugs that block dopamine receptors.
But if you block dopamine receptors systemically,
You are lifting the brake on the pituitary. You're blocking the D2 receptors on the lactotropes. So you treat the patient's psychosis, but suddenly they start lactating galactorrhea. Men can develop gynecomastia, which is breast tissue, and erectile dysfunction. Women lose their periods. It's a major reason patients stop taking their psychiatric meds.
that is a fascinating collision of psychiatry and endocrinology. So how do we treat a prolactinoma? A tumor that's overproducing prolactin, we need to put the brake back on.
We use dopamine agonists. We mimic the natural brake signal. The classic one is bromocriptine, but the gold standard now is cabergoline.
And why is cabergoline better?
It's a super brake.
Yeah.
First, it has a much higher affinity for the D2 receptor, the specific dopamine receptor on the pituitary lactotropes. And second, it has an incredibly long half-life. You can take it just once or twice a week.
And bromocriptine.
Requires daily or even twice daily dosing, and it's notorious for causing nausea and orthostatic hypotension dizziness when you stand up. Cabergoline is much better tolerated.
And these drugs are incredibly effective.
They are unique in the world of oncology. Usually, if you have a brain tumor, you have to cut it out or radiate it. But prolactinomas are so exquisitely sensitive to cabergoline that the drug itself can actually shrink the tumor. It causes the tumor cells to involute and die. It is literally chemical surgery.
So surgery is often just the backup plan.
Exactly. For almost every other pituitary tumor, surgery is first line. For prolactinoma, pills are first line.
That brings us to section 4, the gonadotropic rhythm, the HPG or hypothalamic pituitary gonadal axis. This is where that concept of time as information really shines.
It's the central lesson of this axis. The players here are familiar. GnRH, gonadotropin-releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, LH, luteinizing hormone, and FSH, follicle-stimulating hormone from the pituitary. And then the gonads, ovaries or testes, making sex steroids like testosterone and estrogen.
But simply listing the hormones misses the entire point. The magic is in the pulsatility.
Right. GnRH is not a continuous stream. It is a pulse. In a healthy reproductive age adult, it pulses roughly every 60 to 120 minutes.
Why does it pulse? Why not just a steady flow to keep things going?
Because of receptor physiology.
Huh.
The GnRH receptors on the pituitary are very sensitive. If you expose them to a constant, unceasing stream of GnRH, they essentially freak out. They uncouple from their internal signaling machinery and then get pulled inside the cell to be destroyed. They downregulate.
The pituitary stops listening if the shouting never stops.
Exactly. The pulse allows the receptor to reset itself in the quiet periods. The silence between the pulses is just as important as the pulse itself for maintaining the system.
And you mentioned earlier that the frequency of the pulse actually changes the message.
This is the real aha moment from Goodman and Gilman. The pituitary can count. If the GnRH pulses are fast, high frequency, say every 60 minutes, the pituitary interprets that as a command to preferentially make LH.
And if they're slower?
If the pulses slow down low frequency, say every 3 hours, it interprets that as a command to preferentially make FSH.
That is mind-blowing. It's literally Morse code. ... means LH, ... means FSH. The same molecule, GnRH, carries 2 different messages just based on its rhythm.
And this isn't just academic trivia. We exploit this to engineer drugs. We can turn the reproductive system on or OFF using the exact same molecule just by changing how we deliver it.
Let's unpack that. The paradox of agonists as antagonists.
Let's take leuprolide. This is a synthetic GnRH agonist. It's a key that turns the lock. It activates the receptor.
So if I have a patient who's infertile because their hypothalamus is lazy, it's not pulsing GnRH correctly, how do I use leuprolide to help them?
You have to mimic nature. You have to be pulsatile.
Right.
You hook them up to a portable pump. It looks a lot like an insulin pump that squirts a tiny calculated drop of a GnRH agonist under the skin every 90 minutes.
Pulse.
Yeah, the result. The pituitary sees the rhythm. It wakes up. It starts making LH and FSH in the correct ratios, and fertility is restored. You are stimulating the system by mimicking its natural rhythm.
Okay, that's turning it on. Now take the opposite case. A patient with metastatic prostate cancer. The cancer feeds on testosterone. We need to stop all testosterone production. We want to chemically castrate him.
So we take that same drug leuprolide, but we give it as a continuous depot injection. It's a formulation that sits under the skin and releases a steady, high-concentration stream of the drug 247.
The shout that never stops, the doorbell that someone is leaning on.
Exactly. The pituitary gets overwhelmed. It downregulates its receptors. It pulls them inside the cell. It goes deaf. After about a week or two, LH and FSH production drops to 0. Testosterone drops to castrate levels. You have used an agonist to achieve total antagonism, a total shutdown.
I want to drill down on this because it sounds like a paradox. We are giving a drug that stimulates the receptor to stop the result. How does shouting make this system go silent?
It's the difference between hearing a noise and going deaf from that noise.
Yeah.
When you first give continuous leuprolide, for the first few days, the receptors on the pituitary surface bind the drug and they fire like crazy. That's the flare. The pituitary thinks it's go time.
And that's the dangerous week we hinted at earlier.
It can be very dangerous. But cells are smart. They want homeostasis. If a receptor is being triggered nonstop, 247, the cell interprets that as a malfunction or a toxicity. So it engages a protective mechanism called downregulation and desensitization.
It pulls the plug on the system.
Literally. The cell membrane invaginates, it folds inward, and physically pulls those GnRH receptors inside the cell into vesicles. It eats them. It sends them to the lysosome to be destroyed.
So even though the drug is still floating in the blood screaming, "Make testosterone,"
Yeah.
there are no doorbells left on the surface to ring.
Exactly. The surface is scrubbed clean of receptors. That is how an agonist becomes a functional antagonist over time.
But let's go back to that flare. You said it's dangerous. Why? Give me a clinical scenario.
Imagine you have an elderly patient with prostate cancer that has spread to his spine. The tumor is pressing on his spinal cord. He's got back pain. He's barely walking.
Okay.
You give him his first depot shot of leuprolide. For the first 7 to 10 days, the pituitary hasn't downregulated yet. It is just seeing a massive continuous go signal. So it dumps all its stored LH. Testosterone levels spike, sometimes even higher than baseline.
It adds fuel to the fire.
Exactly. The tumor flares up, it grows, it swells. If it swells in the spine, it can compress the spinal cord and cause permanent paralysis. It can cause excruciating bone pain.
That is a disaster, a total iatrogenic catastrophe. So how do we prevent it?
We have to cover the flare. For the first few weeks of therapy, we give the patient a second drug, an androgen receptor blocker, like bicalutamide. This drug goes to the tumor itself and puts a shield on the testosterone receptors. So even though testosterone levels spike, the tumor can't see it.
You shield the target until the pituitary goes deaf.
Correct. Once the downregulation kicks in after about 2 to 3 weeks, testosterone levels will plummet, and then you can safely stop the blocker and just maintain the leuprolide.
This is such a great example of why you can't just know what a drug does. You have to know how it does it over time. The timing is everything.
Absolutely. Now, there is a newer class of drugs, the GnRH antagonists, like Tegarelix. These just bind to the receptor and block it immediately. No activation, no flare.
So why don't we just use those all the time? They sound safer.
We are starting to, but Leuprolide has been around forever. It's cheaper, and the depot formulations that last for 3 months, 6 months are very convenient. Daguerreolix requires monthly injections that can be painful at the injection site, so Leuprolide is still a clinical workhorse.
Fascinating. Let's wrap up the axes with section 5, the posterior pituitary. We're going back to the brain extension.
We're back to the neural tissue. Remember, the hormones here are made in the brain and just stored in the posterior pituitary. We have two main players, oxytocin and vasopressin, which is also called ADH.
And chemically, they are almost twins, aren't they?
They are. They are both cyclic nonpeptides, little loops of 9 amino acids, and they only differ by 2 of those amino acids. Evolutionarily, they probably arose from the same ancestral gene that duplicated, yet their functions are totally different.
Talk to me about oxytocin.
Oxytocin is the hormone of labor and milk letdown, and I want to emphasize, it's milk letdown, not production. Prolactin makes the milk. Oxytocin causes the contraction of the little myoepithelial cells around the milk ducts to eject it. It's the squeeze.
And in labor.
It causes powerful uterine contractions. Goodman and Gilman explains it uses the GQ pathway, which increases intracellular calcium in the uterine smooth muscle cells, causing them to contract. But here's another critical timing detail. The uterus isn't very sensitive to oxytocin for most of pregnancy. It has very few receptors.
So the low levels of oxytocin floating around in the second trimester don't trigger premature labor.
Exactly. But as you get to term, under the influence of rising estrogen, the uterus sprouts oxytocin receptors like crazy. It becomes hypersensitive. That's why we can use synthetic oxytocin, brand name Pitocin, as an IV drip to induce or augment labor at term.
And vasopressin, also called ADH, antidiuretic hormone.
This hormone answers to salt and pressure. If your blood gets too salty or hypertonic-like, when your dehydrated osmoreceptors in the brain fire, or if your blood pressure drops dramatically, like in a hemorrhage, baroreceptors in your arteries fire.
And the brain responds by releasing ADH from the posterior pituitary. What does it do?
It has 2 main jobs, named by its 2 names. As an antidiuretic hormone, it goes to the kidney, specifically the collecting duct, and binds to V2 receptors. This causes the kidney to insert water channels, called aquacorins, into the wall of the duct.
And that lets water out of the urine and back into the blood.
Exactly. It concentrates the urine and dilutes the blood, conserving water. As vasopressin, it also binds to V1 receptors on the smooth muscle of blood vessels, causing them to clamp down, or vasoconstrict, which raises blood pressure.
Now, what happens if you don't have it? If those neurons in the hypothalamus die?
You get diabetes insipidus. This has nothing to do with sugar diabetes. Diabetes just means siphon, or passing through. Insipidus means tasteless. You are passing liters and liters of tasteless, dilute urine. You can pee 10 or even 20 liters a day. You spend your entire life just drinking water and peeing. It's exhausting and dangerous.
And the drug for that?
Desmopressin, or DDAVP. And this is a triumph of medicinal chemistry. The scientists took the natural vasopressin molecule and tweaked it just a little bit. They made it super selective for the V2 receptor in the kidney and virtually blind to the V1 receptor on blood vessels.
Why is that so important?
Because if you just gave natural vasopressin to a kid for bedwetting or to a teacher with DI, you would also clamp down all their arteries and cause massive hypertension. Desmopressin lets us fix the urine problem without breaking the blood pressure.
It's a precision tool.
A very smart, precise tool.
All right, we have unpacked a lot of biology today. Let's head to the outro and try to synthesize all of this.
If you zoom out, the theme that just keeps coming up here is balance through feedback. The HPA axis is a machine that is exquisitely designed to maintain stability, to maintain homeostasis in a chaotic world.
And the tool it uses to do that, it seems, is sensitivity. It's not a brute force system.
Not at all. It's not just about how much hormone is there, but how the target tissue is listening. We saw downregulation, the cells putting in earplugs with continuous Leuprolide. We saw upregulation, the cells installing more antennas with oxytocin in late pregnancy. The state of the receiver is just as important as the signal itself.
And we saw that timing is information. A pulse means go. A continuous stream means stop. That is a concept that applies way beyond just endocrinology.
It really does. And from a pharmacological perspective, remember our strategy. We are hackers. We're not reinventing the wheel. We're just intervening in the existing system. We use pegvisomant to jam the lock mechanism. We use Leuprolide to shout until the system goes deaf. We use cabergoline to fix the broken brake. We are intervening in these loops to restore balance.
Here's my final provocative thought for you to take away. I keep thinking about that portal system, that secret blood bridge between the hypothalamus and the pituitary.
It's a compelling anatomical feature for sure.
It implies that the brain has secrets. It has signals that are so potent, so powerful that they cannot be allowed to touch the rest of the body in high concentration. They have to be whispered directly and privately into the ear of the pituitary. If GHRH or TRH or GnRH circulated in the whole body at the concentrations found in that portal system, who knows what chaos they would cause.
It's a containment strategy, high potency but very short range. It's the brain keeping its most powerful commands strictly on a need-to-know basis. The pituitary needs to know, the rest of the body doesn't.
Need-to-know basis. I love that. Listeners, that is your map of the hypothalamic pituitary axis. Now go read the territory. Go to Katzin chapter 37 for the dosages, the side effects, the clinical protocols.
And then go to Goodman and Gilman chapter 42 for the receptor physics and the deep molecular mechanisms. Don't skip the reading. This was just the tour guide to get you oriented.
Thanks for diving deep with us. We'll see you next time.
Stay curious.